Hello, good afternoon, or good evening rather, and welcome to tonight's speaker event. It is a true pleasure to welcome all you cool cats and kittens to today's speaker. Carole Baskin is the CEO of Big Cat Rescue, a nonprofit animal sanctuary based in Florida. She's a lead campaigner for the introduction of laws to prevent the private trade and ownership of big cats. She came to prominence following the documentary series on Netflix called Tiger King. She starred in the 2001 Louis Theroux documentary called Shooting Joey Exotic. It's a true pleasure to have you with us today. Thank you for visiting today, Carole Baskin.
Well, thank you, Michael. And I'm going to have to take you on the roadshow with me to introduce to all of those cool cats and kittens. Thank you for that. Very happy to be here.
Thank you very much. We're very glad to see you too. I just thought we should just begin this, turning the dial back in time. Before you got into big cats, surely there was a journey. We wanted to get an insight into what inspired you to get into the protection of animals, and exactly when in your life did this occur?
Recently, I was asked to find some photos of myself when I was a baby, and I pulled some out of my mother's photo album. And you know how photos are like stuck in an album, the old style type. And when I pulled it out, it was a picture of my mother holding me. I had just come home from the hospital as a new baby, and my father was holding a little striped kitten. And on the back, it said that the cat's name was Tiger. So I think it was probably in the cards from the beginning. But as a child, I never played with dolls. I only played with cats and toy cats. And then when I was, I think, 8 or 10 years old, my grandmother insisted that I take my cat Smokey and her kittens to the animal shelter. And I didn't know at the time what happened at animal shelters. And when I learned that most of the cats who enter shelters never come out of them alive, I made it my life's mission that I was going to end that. And so by the time I was 15, I decided that I needed to make a lot of money, because that was a huge problem in the United States back in the 60s and 70s. They were killing millions of cats every year in shelters due to overpopulation. But my father didn't want me to work and wanted me to go to school, of course. My mother and I had always been best friends, and we got into our first fight when I was 15. And she said, "When I get home, I don't want to see your face." And I thought she meant ever. So I packed my bags and I left home at the age of 15. And I just scared my poor parents half to death for months until we reconnected again. But I never was able to go back home, because once you leave home, you're kind of out there. And I was accustomed to working jobs and being on my own. And so when I was 17, I was wanting to be working around domestic cats, getting involved in the veterinary practice, that sort of thing. I was raising and showing purebred cats, Himalayans and Persians, at cat shows and such. Those cats, and I would never do that knowing what I know about them now, but they suffer from an awful lot of genetic issues because they're bred to such an extreme. So I was at vet offices all the time. And if a bobcat, a native wildcat here in the US, it's about the size of a Scottish wildcat for your side of the pond, maybe 25 pounds. If they get hit by a car, the vet can fix them up in 30 minutes to an hour, but then you've got months of rehab for those broken bones to heal so that that animal can go back to the wild. So when I was 17, a vet asked me if I would do that kind of work, rehab the cat, and then release it. And there is nothing on this planet more scary or vicious than a bobcat. They are so wicked, and they have no appreciation for the fact that you are trying to help them. But I loved that indomitable spirit that they had. And so I looked for any opportunity to do that again. And so I've been doing rehab and release my whole life since I was 17. But later on, I ended up being married, and we were in real estate for a living. And so we would go to auctions and buy llamas, because you could turn llamas loose on big tracts of land and they clear about eye level. And so at this auction, the guy next to me starts bidding on a bobcat, a 6-month-old bobcat that a fellow had brought in. He said his wife got her as a pet. She wasn't fun anymore because she was 6 months old. She was starting to do what bobcats do, which is become these really vicious animals. And I leaned over to the guy who was bidding on the cat and I said, when that cat grows up, she's going to tear your face off. And he said, I'm a taxidermist. I'm just going to club her in the head in the parking lot and make a den decoration out of her. And so I started crying and my husband started bidding, and we came home with Winsong, who was every bit as terrible as I expected that she would be. She would lay down on top of the refrigerator and wait for my husband to go by and then launch onto him and start ripping his hair out. She was chasing my daughter and our German Shepherd all over the house and terrorizing them. And instead of thinking, wow, this is a really bad idea as a pet, and she couldn't be released because she had been declawed by the former owner, and she was born in captivity. Any exotic cat that's born in captivity is doomed to live in captivity their entire life because it's illegal to set them free. So she couldn't go back to the wild like the other wild bobcats I had worked with. So my husband called around to try and find somebody she could grow up with that she wasn't going to kill. And a guy said he had bobcat kittens in Minnesota, but that we'd have to go there in person to pick them up. So we did. And we drove a van up to Minnesota. My daughter was 12 at the time. She brought a little friend of hers from school. We took up some pet carriers to come back with bobcats for her to grow up with. And when we got there, it turned out to be a fur farm. And they had just row after row after row of cats in cages and a pile of dead cats in the corner of the room. And I asked the guy, I said, is there this big of a market for these animals as pets? And he said, oh, no, we're a fur farm. Whatever we don't sell as pets, we'll harvest the next year for their fur. And when I looked at that pile of dead cats in the corner, I noticed that only this little piece of white belly fur was cut off of each cat. And then the bodies were just stacked in the corner that I later found are then fed back to the other animals in the fur farm. And so I just burst into tears. And my husband said, how much for every cat here? And we came home with 56 bobcats, Canada lynx, and Siberian lynx. And we started building cages as fast as we could. We put the cats that we could into pet homes, but a year and a half later, almost all of them were coming back to us because they don't make good pets. And it was at that time that I realized, okay, that's not working. And we had bought out 2 more fur farms, or bought out that same fur farm of all of the adults the next year. And then the next year, 22 off of another fur farm. And so that put all of the fur farms in the US that were killing cats for their fur, put all of them out of business. And we were starting to work on the fur farms in Canada in 1997 to get the cats out of there when I lost my husband. And he just walked out of the house one day and never came back. And so you guys saw from Tiger King a lot of the craziness that happened after that. My real estate business was tied up at a conservatorship. And if you've heard anything about Britney Spears and conservatorships, you know how awful that is. And that went on for 5 years. And so it made it impossible for us to get the rest of the cats out of the fur farms in Canada. But meanwhile, people started calling and they were saying, can you take my lion? Can you take my tiger? And I'm thinking, what are these crazy people doing with lions and tigers in their backyards? I couldn't believe that even existed. So at each step along the way, I think I was just very naive. I thought I could fix it, and I thought it wouldn't take long to fix it because surely people would never stand for cats being killed for their fur. Surely people would never stand for lions and tigers in backyards and basements. But it started us on a 30-year path, and we're finally closing in on it. You know, the fur industry is pretty much dead. Circus industry is pretty much dead. So the only thing that we've got now to do is to do away with the captive breeding of big cats because they do not belong in cages. Well, a very long answer to your very first question.
No, thank you. Really enjoy that. Thank you. I'd like to remind the participant that there's opportunity for you to ask questions to Carole Baskin. Feel free to use the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom panel. I'm noted during your speech about how you've gone from being a young person who cared more about cats and played with cats to where you are now. The transition from you being a 15-year-old person who left home into the big wide world and now where you are advocating for protection of cats. I wonder how the fame and of the Netflix shows impacted your ability to still stay true to protecting cats? Is this hindered or helped it in any way?
It seems to be about an even mix. The narrative in Tiger King was so hateful and untrue to make people believe that I had killed my husband, a man who I loved very much, made people believe that I had stolen money from him and his family when my husband had, he could read at about a first grade level. I was the person who built our real estate business. I was the person who set aside money for his children to have. I was the person who made sure that they got that money when he did disappear. And yet none of that was what was reflected in Tiger King. So to have everyone around the world believe that I was this horrible, murdering, home-wrecking thief did nothing to help me in my quest to get members of Congress here in the US to listen to me when I said we need a federal bill to ban the cub petting, which drives almost all of the abuse of big cats, because they have to churn out new cubs every month or so, because they can only use them from about 8 weeks to 12 weeks legally. And then they have to breed more cubs. And so all of those cubs are the ones that are ending up being discarded, used for their parts, creating a legal smokescreen for illegal activities like poaching, and having that negative influence follow me everywhere I go, so that people aren't even sure that they want to have a meeting with me to talk about these serious issues has been very harmful to our mission. The only good thing that came out of Tiger King was, and I was just talking to somebody about this morning, who said they didn't know anything about the whole cub petting thing. They didn't know tigers are going extinct in the wild because of all these backyard breeders. And they didn't know that until they saw Tiger King. So I think there is that one glimmer of a silver lining to Tiger King, but everything else about it was harmful.
Sorry to hear that. I think before I go on to ask about the Congress bill, which you're working so hard on, I thought it would be nice for you to tell us a positive, happy memory that you cherish with your ex-husband.
Well, he's not my ex-husband, because I never would have divorced the man. I loved him. He was suffering from dementia, and I was trying to get him the help that he needed. But my late husband, happy memory with him. I mean, everything with him was just so crazy, because he was so crazy. And one of the things in real estate that I felt like, his the way that he would inspire me to invest in real estate is he would go and see a house that was abandoned, and he would put a for sale sign on it, and he'd sell the house. And then he'd go to the closing and say to me that, or tell me that this closing is coming. He's like, I have a closing next week on this house and I don't own it, and I've got to prove that I own it. So can you maybe find the owner and see if we can buy it for less than what I sold it for? And so, I'd be like, you did what? And so I'd have to scramble. And the furthest I ever had to go was all the way to the UK to find somebody who had a piece of property that was here that they weren't paying the taxes on. And that's why it looked like it did. And I managed to track them down and get them to sign the property over to me so that he could then go and sell it at the closing. So it was just every day was that kind of a thing with him, doing something just totally bizarre, but it would be something that in most cases challenged me to really reach deep inside, be creative as a way to keep him out of trouble.
Oh, wow. I think that anyone that encourages Americans to come and visit our lovely island in the UK is a very positive influence. And about the Congress bill, I know that since 1998, this bill, which primarily aims to sort of ban the petting of cubs, has been reintroduced many times without much success. In 2003, there was some success with the Captive Wildlife Safety Act, but there was a loophole in that. Could you tell us a bit about what the loophole is and what you're doing now to deal with this?
Yeah, whenever you pass a bill through Congress, I don't know if it's the same for you, but here there's a lot of give and take that has to happen. And our sessions are 2-year sessions. So in 2003, the bill we had been working on for all those years before passed, but we had to make some concessions. And 2 of the things that we had to give up on were the cub petting and the private ownership. But it passed in 2003 with unanimously, which never happens, that both Republicans and Democrats and independents, all 3 of them said, yeah, we need this federal bill. So it passed. And then we've been working since 2003 to try and close that loophole, to ban the cub petting, which is driving all this breeding and discarding, and to phase out the private ownership. Because when we go to CITES, and I sent my daughter, and she's been working with me all these years with the sanctuary, and her husband at the time was our veterinarian, and he's still our veterinarian. Even though they're not married, they still have a great relationship. But we sent them to CITES, and when they were there, they said, the Chinese look at us and say, don't tell us that we shouldn't be farming tigers for their parts, because you in the US, you don't even know where your tigers are. And it's true. There is no way for anybody to know how many tigers are in backyards across America, because there's no government body that counts them. So we have been trying all of these years, and every year we gain a little bit more momentum. We get more people that are co-sponsors. We get more Republican support, which has been the hard thing to get, because in most cases, the Republicans, it's not that they want to abuse tigers, it's just that they don't believe the federal government should play a role in these things, and it should be decided state by state. And thankfully, a lot of states have passed bans and partial bans. So in 2003, I had to turn away 312 big cats. And that was in addition to all of the cats we were able to rescue. And I mean, all of the good sanctuaries were completely full and overflowing with lions and tigers in 2003. But when that bill passed, that number had been doubling every other year of the number of cats that were being discarded. When that bill passed, it dropped for the first time ever from 312 to like 165. And so that was the first real wake-up call that the only way we were going to end this was through good legislation. And that's when I started putting every bit of my time that I possibly could into changing the laws. My husband that I have now, Howard, we've been together since 2002. He initially helped me out because he's a Harvard MBA, really smart guy, and helped us get the sanctuary financially stable. It was being supplemented with my real estate income for the first 11 years. But we finally got the sanctuary to where it could raise the $3.5 to $4 million a year that it takes to take care of the cats on its own, which freed me up to go after better laws. And so now that he's got the sanctuary stable, he's helping me with those better laws. And he's really the driving force now behind keeping everybody on target. We work with all of the big animal groups together. We have an amazing team of lobbyists, people from the sheriff's associations, other animal welfare organizations, all of us working together for this federal bill that will ban the cub petting and phase out private ownership. So now we have over 220 co-sponsors in the House, and we're like this close to having a majority. And in the Senate, I think we have 34 co-sponsors, that's their way of saying when it comes to the floor for a vote, I'm going to vote for it. So we feel really confident that we can do it this year.
That's really admirable. Great work. For our members who might think, petting a cat is such an adorable thing and such a cute thing, could you explain to them why cub petting is quite a terrible thing for tiger cubs and so on?
Yeah, it's hard for people to wrap their minds around how something so cute can be so cruel, because it's like, it's just like petting a dog. That's not bad. But what they don't understand is the only way that you can pet a cub is as soon as that cub is born, like people may have seen in Tiger King, they are taking those cubs away from their moms. If the mother raises them even for more than a few days, what happens is she will teach, even if she's somewhat malleable herself, she will teach those cubs to be like feral cats. There's no way you're going to get your hands on them to get a picture made, because they are going to be hissing and spitting and trying to tear your face off. And so that's why they take them away from the moms. They never get to go back to the moms. And just like you saw in Tiger King, they leave those males and females together and breed her right back. The minute her cubs are out of the den, she's being bred back again. In nature, a tiger might breed every 3 or 4 years, and in captivity, they're bred every 68 days until they just breed them to death. And so when people are paying to pet a cub or to see a cute cub at a zoo, that's what they're paying for. They're paying for those mother cats to be bred to death. And then there's nobody that wants the cubs after they're not cute anymore. Once they get to be about 12 weeks old, they can take a finger off a child, and they go from being this very lucrative product that they can make over $100,000 off of during that 1 month of photo ops. Then they go to being a cat who costs us at the sanctuary $10,000 per year per tiger, just for the food and vet care, not any of the overhead of the sanctuary. So as soon as they can't use those cubs, they either kill them, which a lot of them are just killed and buried or burned, incinerated, or they give them away to people as pets. And then, a year later, that animal's 200 pounds and they can't get rid of it fast enough. And 2 years later, it's 500 pounds and has killed somebody by then. So, you've got all of that going on. But the biggest thing, the thing that should make everybody speak out when they see those pictures of people walking lions on leashes or playing with cubs, everybody needs to speak out as to the fact that that activity is what's causing us to lose the cat in the wild. And that's what's hard for people to really wrap their heads around, because we're led to believe through the people who profit off these animals that breeding them is saving them. Because if an animal is going extinct, then of course you should breed it, right? None of these big cats that are being bred in captivity will ever be set free. It's not legal and it's not morally ethical to take an animal who's been raised in captivity and put it out in the wild and expect it to be able to support itself. We do rehab and release with native bobcats and even kittens. We will raise them up, but we do it totally hands off. We monitor them with remote controlled cameras and they're fed a live diet so they learn how to hunt. And then when we release them back to the wild, we set up camera traps to make sure they're doing okay. Just yesterday, we worked with our state to put the first tracking collars on a couple of cats that we're about to release, because there's a disease that's killing cats in Florida. And they're trying to figure out what the origin of that is by collaring these cats. So hopefully we can save the entire population through knowing what happens when they go out there. But as far as the how this is killing the tigers in the wild, is what I mentioned before. As long as all of these legally bred products are ending up in people's hands, like tiger skins and tiger, if you get caught in the United States with a tiger tooth around your neck, you just say, that was my pet tiger. Nobody can do anything about it. But for people who can afford those things, they don't want some inbred, cage-raised tiger as their talisman. They want the premium product. They want the wild tiger. They want the wild tiger teeth, the wild tiger skins, the wild tiger bones. And those bones are actually ground up and made into a medicinal paste and also used in something called tiger bone wine. And those things are given as luxury products and as bribes often to government officials in Asian countries. And as long as we have this legal smokescreen of all of these cats that are legally owned and traded and discarded, then they're never going to be able to catch the poachers that are really killing the tigers in the wild. You can't tell a captive born tiger from a cage raised tiger, or a captive bred tiger from a wild tiger when you're looking at its parts. And that's why if we're going to save the tiger in the wild, we have to stop all of this private ownership and private possession of these magnificent animals.
Totally agree. Going back to your documentary, Tiger King, many have argued that, your sanctuary to some degree is a liken to roadside zoos that you've campaigned against all your life. Could you explain to our members why that is exactly not the case?
Yeah, the only thing that we have in common is that both zoos and sanctuaries have tigers in cages. Everything else is totally different philosophies. Zoos are in the business of breeding tigers and having tigers in cages so that people will pay to come see them. Sanctuaries do not buy, they don't breed, they don't sell, they don't allow public contact with the cats. And any legitimate sanctuary's main goal should be that they don't have to exist, which is our goal. We don't think there should have to be sanctuaries rescuing big cats from awful situations. We just need to get rid of all of the awful situations so that they don't need places like ours. And so that's what we're aiming to do, and how we are so different from any place that is a zoo.
Thank you. One of our members, or a couple of our members, have asked, about your character and how you're presented in Tiger King. I think you mentioned earlier on about how people came off that documentary with a wrong perception of who you are, and that's hindered the work you're doing, especially with Congress. Could you tell us more about how you feel you were portrayed in that in Tiger King, and what you've learned from that now?
Before Tiger King, we would work with any media producer who came to us that said they were working on some kind of an expose about big cats. So we have often, and even with Tiger King, we worked with those people for 5 years. Anytime they wanted to come out, we'd have them into the sanctuary, into my home, into my mother's home. Anything that they asked us, we were an open book to them. And we've been that way with everyone. We have never had somebody take all of the information that we gave them, pick out little bits and pieces to create some false narrative for some kind of a commercial venture that the producers of Tiger King did. That just, it was such a betrayal that for months after Tiger King, I wouldn't even respond to the press because I felt so betrayed by them. How could anybody try to portray the people who are abusing tigers and causing their extinction as being these glamorous, interesting people that should be emulated, and then take the people like Brittany Pete was in Tiger King from PETA, and me, people that are working to end the abuse of big cats, and try to disparage my personality, to assassinate my character. What on earth was that about? So I was stunned by that, absolutely stunned that was their attitude. And I can't prove it. I have been told that they made $14 million selling Tiger King. And of course, they didn't pay us anything. We never charged anybody to come film the cats before that. So, for them to turn that into something that profited them in such a huge manner at the expense of the tiger, which I think was the real loser in Tiger King. They had the opportunity when that came out during lockdown and it was seen by 64 million people. What if they had actually told the truth? What if they had actually talked about all of the stuff that we talked to them about all the stuff I just talked to you about, and had educated people about how close we are to losing the tiger in the wild and why we need to take action right now to stop the abuse of these cats? Why every time we see somebody showing off with a cat on a leash, we need to call them out and say, that is not cool. That is just somebody, and this truly is just somebody playing with a cub. They can't get away with that after they become adults. If you think about Siegfried and Roy, they came across as these magicians that had these cats in their houses. As soon as they become adults, they will kill their own parents for their territory. And it's exactly the same with any person who raises them. As soon as they become adults, which is usually between the ages of 5 to 7, that's when they will kill you. And that's when these people get rid of them because they can't show off with them anymore. But the public sees it and they think because it's a 500-pound cat, it must be an adult. And they think that they buy into that fantasy, that romantic notion that is just ludicrous. So when you see people posing with cats on TikTok and Facebook and Instagram, don't just ignore them, call them out on it. And I think it would stop. It would stop if they weren't getting attention or money for it.
Yeah, definitely agree, 100%. Producers, I guess, in these shows tend to perhaps have their own narrative that they portray, which might not be true to what those who are the stars and subjects are trying to sell. I wonder what you thought the role of you being a woman had in that. Would they have treated your character the same way had you been a man? Do you think that had any impact in how you're portrayed on Tiger King?
Actually, I do, because they made this out to be a feud between me and Joe Exotic, which was crazy because I've never even spoken to Joe. It's my husband, Howard, the Harvard MBA, the guy who is like the most serious, buttoned down, sweetest person that you would ever meet. I teased when I first met him that he must be like a professional friend because he had hundreds of friends. When he told people that we were dating, I met hundreds of people from like his entire history. Everybody loves Howard Baskin. And it was Howard Baskin, my husband, who handled that whole lawsuit with Joe. He was the one that was in court with him all the time. He was the one dealing with the attorneys. I never had to pay any attention to Joe at all and tried my best to ignore him. And yet, if the producers of Tiger King had tried to pit this amazing, wonderful person that is my husband against this tiger killing redneck from Oklahoma, nobody was going to fall in love with Joe Exotic, But if they can paint me out to be some kind of a Karen who's telling men you can't do what you want to do, then I think it really appealed to that element of our society. After Tiger King, people in the UK were some of the most sweet, precious people to me. They were so kind and so thoughtful and loving and generous. And it was because you guys dealt with this problem back in the 70s. Whereas here in America, where people are allowed to have tigers and guns and pretty much do whatever they want to do, they do not want some woman telling them they can't do that. And that's where I've gotten all of the hateful comments and messages.
Yeah, I do think the British people are a very warm kind, so that does make sense. I wonder what your thought is very quickly on the announcement of the next season of Tiger King. Will you be featuring, or what's your thoughts on that at all?
After Tiger King came out, Rebecca Chaiklin, who was one of the producers that we dealt with the most on the thing, came to me, and because we said when Tiger King came out, we didn't even know who produced that. We actually called the producers and we're like, who's putting that show out? Because that doesn't sound like anything that we're working on with anybody. And all of a sudden they didn't want to talk to us. So then after Tiger King came out, they called us up and they said, oh, we just want to clear the air with you. And I said, lose my number. Fool me once, shame on you, but fool me twice, shame on me. So I wouldn't talk to her at all and never would take another message from her. I blocked her. And there's no way that I would trust them again after what they did. They had every opportunity to tell the truth at the end. And there had been a podcast that came out August before Tiger King called Over My Dead Body, Joe Exotic. And what that person had done, and this is the one that the Kate McKinnon piece that they're working on is based on the Wondery podcast. But that Wondery podcast kind of took the viewer along the same emotional roller coaster that Tiger King was. But at the end of it, he said, but here's what I found out to be true. And he lists off all of the lies that had been told by all of these animal abusers and pretty much validated our position in that. And so I'm hoping Kate McKinnon's piece follows that same format. But the producers of Tiger King didn't do that. They never got around to actually telling the truth at the end and saying, but here's what we found out to be true, because we gave them, I gave them the receipts from my husband being seen for his dementia and having an MRI at St. Joseph's and being diagnosed as being bipolar. And I showed them all of the documents from the conservatorship showing that I had been more than fair with his family. None of that stuff ended up in Tiger King because it didn't suit their narrative. So there was no way I was going to participate in anything with people that were that hell-bent on twisting the truth.
Yeah, thank you. Since Tiger King has come out, obviously Big Cat Rescue has become one of the most successful and well-known animal sanctuaries. And I was thinking, what do you have in store for yourself and the charity now? And what vision do you have for the future of your charity?
I think it's a misnomer. People think, oh, because Tiger King was so popular, that it must have been very financially successful for you. No, it wasn't. In 2020, we had exactly the same numbers that we had financially in 2019, which, given the fact that COVID was out there, was a good thing, because we were worried just from COVID that we would see a decrease. But we at least stayed steady with 2019 numbers, and 2021 is looking the same. We're about the same as we were in 2020 and 2019 before Tiger King came out, before COVID. So we're managing to stay stable, but we're not increasing in our wealth by any means. As far as our future, our main future is to put ourselves out of business. Our goal is to get our federal bill passed into law so that there's no need for us to rescue animals anymore. We'll still do the rehab and release, the ones that are native animals that can go back to the wild, but there shouldn't have to be sanctuaries rescuing tigers from god-awful situations in captivity.
Yeah, 100%. A couple of our members have asked that, given that you're a lover of animals, are you a vegetarian or vegan? And have you considered being one, if not?
I have been a vegetarian since 1999. And I lean toward veganism. I order from Bistro. It's a company that produces prepackaged vegan meals. And I eat 2 meals a day because I do intermittent fasting. And so those are my main meals that I eat. I eat 2 meals a day and they're vegan. But every once in a while, like I just came back from LA and there was no soy for my coffee. So I had half and half in my coffee. But I try to be vegan as much as I possibly can.
Thank you. You mentioned that you do intermittent fasting. Part of your routine in the day, could you walk us through what your routine is like on a normal day?
When I wake up in the morning, which is usually about 7:15 or so, I lay there in bed and I just lay there thanking my lucky stars for everything in my life that is wonderful. I try to list through everything that I'm grateful for, everything that makes my heart just swell with joy, everything that I love about other people and about this planet. And then as I'm getting up and I'm getting my coffee and I'm going to start my day, which starts at 7:30, answering hundreds of emails that come in every night. And that was true before Tiger King. It's been many hundreds now. It used to be 200 a day. Now it's probably 500 a day. But as I start going into that and answering all of the emails, I keep reminding myself of why I'm doing this and what's important to me, which is ending the abuse of these cats. And then lately, I've been doing a lot of work around my house, moving a bunch of plants around. It's a long story, but it's requiring a lot of watering, hand watering of the plants. And so I'm getting to spend a lot of time out in nature in the early mornings and late evenings that I wasn't getting to do before. And by about 10 o'clock, I ride my bike to work, which is a 5-mile each way trip on my bike. Once I get here to the sanctuary, I'm dealing with more emails, interviews, recording sessions because I record my daily diary I put out there. And then I also do a big cat briefing, which is where that "Hey, all you cool cats and kittens" came from. Like in 2012, I was saying that on our daily briefing for things that are happening around the sanctuary that we put on social media. Do a lot of social media. Working on thanking the members of Congress who are signing on as co-sponsors and thanking our donors. One of the things that happened in 2020 was when COVID hit, all of our animal care has always been done by volunteers, but we had 20 paid staff, and those 20 paid staff were doing things that volunteers don't want to do, like donor appreciation or outreach to schools or, just all of the administrative type jobs. So I had to let go half of my people because we have to feed these cats. We had to have enough money to take care of them, and we weren't sure that was going to happen. And so that means all of us who are left behind are working 2 and 3 jobs. So my new job that I got to take over was donor appreciation. So I'm writing all of the thank you notes and sending out videos to the big donors, and then dealing with all of our staff issues as far as, whenever anything breaks. The people come to me, I can't get into Amazon today. I can't get into the website. I can't get into our Shopify store. Those things usually end up on my plate to try and fix. And then I was every day at 4 o'clock, we do evening meds and snacks with the cats. So most of our cats are really, really old. We work with the accredited sanctuaries whenever there's a big rescue, but we always take the oldest and the sickest because we have the best facilities for a hospital and we are able to raise more money than most of the other sanctuaries. And so we take the oldest and the sickest. So twice a day, there's a time when you go around and hand out all of the medications for all of the old cat arthritis type issues. And so I would follow them around and film that for our people. I haven't been able to do that as much in the last year because of COVID, not wanting to be too close to the cats. But then usually my day, the end of my day follows the sun. When the sun goes down early, like in the winter, I have to leave by about 4:00 in order to be home before dark. But in the summer, I can work until 8:30 or so before I have to go home. And then when I get home, I'm answering more emails while I'm sitting on TV. I've got my phone and I'm answering emails.
Yeah. It seems like you also have inbuilt, maybe intentionally, some really good habits in terms of like exercise and in the morning remembering about why you're doing what you're doing. And the reason why that resonates with me is I remember in 2020 when the Netflix series came out, it was a time where around the world, everyone was struggling with mental health. People were locked indoors and, locked in confines with their brothers and sisters, and it led to so much uproar in a private sense. But of course, in a wider sense, the isolation from your friends, the inability to engage in things that you're passionate about, meant that people sort of like struggled mentally. I wanted to get your thoughts on mental health and how targeting perhaps with the wider context has impacted yours, and what advice you would give our members in taking care of themselves in that regard.
Couple of things there. One is I believe that everything happens exactly as it should and that it's all for the best. And even though things may seem horrible at the time, like COVID and losing loved ones and all of the craziness that we have dealt with in the past year or 2 years nearly now, I really believe that ultimately we will have found that was what was the wake-up call for us to change our ways before we totally destroyed this planet. I think an awful lot of people realize that we don't need stuff. We don't need to accumulate things the way we thought we did. We don't need travel all over the place and pollute our skies with airplane fuel and all of the consumption that we have when we can go virtually anywhere. I can't get my headset over here, but we can put on the headset and fly anywhere in the world and see everything that we want to see. In fact, that's my ultimate goal for Big Cat Rescue, is leading the way in uniting people all around the world with wild animals in the wild where they belong, working with local governments to install cameras in places where wild cats live so that we can all enjoy them in nature where they belong, and setting that up on smart contracts that are funded through cryptocurrencies so that the money from those subscription feeds to those different cameras that might be in the Himalayas or in India or in Brazil, so that the money from that actually goes back to those local economies, so that people want to protect those animals and protect those forests that they live in, because it's the destruction of our ecosystem that's killing us. And what's caused COVID is us being too deep into the forests and eating animals we shouldn't be eating. And so all of that could be changed in an instant if people who lived near those animals were paid to protect those animals rather than consume them. And that gave them a better way of life where they could feed their families and take care of themselves. And we got the benefit of seeing these animals for who they really are in their natural environment. So that's my big goal for that. But as far as mental health, I really believe that we're eternal, and that sometimes we just forget when we get here who we are. And it's when we have forgotten that we are this amazing eternal creature who is just living this dance of life on this planet and coming back again and again to do that. That's when we get caught up in ourselves and, start feeling sorry for ourselves and end up with all of the kind of emotional issues that we end up with. I don't hold any harsh feelings toward any of the people who have tried to kill me or who have said hateful things about me or any of that, because I believe they've just forgotten who they are. And sooner or later, they'll figure it out. Might take them a few more laps around the universe to figure it out, but they will. And we all will eventually, and then we'll all live in joy.
How wise. Thank you. A member noted that you have very, very nice curtains, and after that, they wanted to ask what you would say to people who think that wearing or using animal print designs glamorizes the objectification of animals.
Yeah, I've had people ask me that before, and I don't know. I used to have this coat. It was a full length fake fur, of course, but it was made with the pattern of a Joffrey cat. And you probably don't even know what a Joffrey cat is, but the thing that I loved about wearing that coat is when people would say exactly what you just said, how could you wear that? Even though they knew, you could tell it's fake, but they'd say, how could you wear that fake fur that looks like an animal? You're taking advantage of that animal, and you're making people want to kill those animals and wear them as coats. And it was my opportunity to say, the number of Joffrey cats it would have taken to make this coat don't even exist in the wild, because we aren't protecting the wild. And so I've always used it as a way of trying to educate people about how we need to take action right now to protect these animals. But I do realize that there are some people who are offended by it, and I don't know how to address that. And maybe someday I'll be offended by it and won't do it. But at this point in my life, I find it as a great way to open up that conversation.
Yeah. On the question of cats and their breeds, do you have a favorite cat breed?
I do. It's the bobcat. And it's because they are just so strong, and they will not back down. My daughter said, if you had a theme song for your life, it would be Tom Petty's Don't Back Down. And I love that about bobcats. It doesn't matter how broken they are. They will never let you see their pain. They are coming for you.
Thank you. One of our members also asked that you were recently on the Dancing with the Stars, the US equivalent of our Strictly Comes Dancing. How was your experience with that? Really exciting.
I had never danced a step in my life. And my mother always said, you can do anything that you set your mind to. So when they asked me to do that, I negotiated with them for quite a while to make sure that they were going to let me talk about the cats, because that was the only way I was going to do this, is if I could talk about the cats and the plight of the cats. And they did. And they even went way above and beyond, where during the times that I wasn't practicing, they would line up all of these different media outlets to talk to me about the issues. And even after I was scratched from the show, they still did that. So they still sent me media all the time. And I so appreciate everybody there for doing that. It was the hardest physical thing I've ever done in my life. And I proved to myself that I could not do anything that I set my mind to, because I was bound and determined to stay in that show through the very end so that I could talk about cats for the whole season. I could not be taught how to dance. And it was humiliating to realize there are some things that I just cannot do.
Thank you. I hope to see you at the big cage fight. I think that's going to be really exciting. One of the things that can't be denied throughout our conversation today and throughout the work you've demonstrably done for the past 20, 30 years is how much you care about animal rights and how much work you put into it. Off the back of that, many have been inspired to do this, and many young people, especially those who have seen your Tiger King documentary. What advice would you give to young people who want to make a headway in promoting animal rights, especially those of cats, in meaningful ways when they feel like it's such a big world and they don't know where to start?
Everybody can be so helpful on social media, because everybody's on social media. And I'd say probably 99% of the abuse of these animals is done for the purpose of people getting attention on social media. That's why they're breeding these cubs and exploiting these cubs and doing the photo ops with them, is because people want to be perceived as being cool by doing that. And it's causing the extinction of these cats. It's causing the abuse of these cats. These mothers are crying out for their babies for weeks after they've been stolen from them. the babies are screaming for their mothers in between every single feeding. They are desperate for their mothers, and they're not getting to go back to their mothers because people are sharing these kinds of images on social media. So everybody can be a voice for these animals. And if you're from the US, you can go to bigcatact.com, and we make it so simple. We have a way you can send a tweet, an email, and make a call. You can choose to do all three or just one. But the calls are the most important because they're the hardest, because people are shy. So call after hours when they're closed. You're just going to talk to an answering machine and ask them to support the Big Cat Public Safety Act. We give you a little script to read. And so that's the best thing people can do, is to speak out for these animals. And once you start speaking out for them and you start seeing the wins, once we started seeing states that were passing laws and bans on having these animals, and different cities were passing bans on fur, and different designers were announcing that they were giving up fur. Every time there's one of those wins and you've been a part of that, it just empowers you to feel like, yes, I can roar out for these animals, and I can be a part of the change that matters to me. And so I really hope that people will be inspired by what we're doing and get involved with what we're doing. One of the things I was most worried about after Tiger King is that people would see the way that I was treated for speaking out for the animals and think, oh my God, I don't want to have to go through that. I'm just going to be quiet. In fact, my Uber driver in Burbank the other day was saying that she was a vegan, and she was from the Ukraine, and she quit talking about being a vegan because she couldn't stand people challenging her. And she said, but when I saw you in Tiger King and I saw how those people came after you and you stood up to them, I decided to start talking about the fact that we shouldn't be eating animals. And so that made my day, that she felt empowered instead of scared off by the way that Tiger King portrayed me.
That's great. We've got a chance for maybe one more question. Brandon would like to ask what your most difficult decision was at Big Cat Rescue, and how did you come to that decision?
The most difficult thing I ever had to deal with was after 9/11 happened, the attack on America. Donations to all animal charities just stopped. And this was it was September 11th of 2001. So the conservatorship still had all of my real estate business tied up to where I couldn't do anything. I was being limited to only being able to use $150,000 a year, even though our budget is like $3 million a year. And so I was having to raise the rest of that through donations and through tour revenue. And all of a sudden it just stopped. And I got down to the last $20,000 in the bank, which was not going to carry me but about a week. And I didn't know what to do, because it was like there was no place to get money from. And yet there were 150 lions, tigers, and leopards out there that had to eat every day. And I decided for the first time ever to hire a consultant. And the consultant did what they call a SWOT analysis: your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And we laid it all out on a board. And I decided I'm not going to look at my weaknesses. I'm not going to look at my threats. I'm going to look at my strengths and my opportunities, and I'm going to focus only on that. And my strengths were that I'm persistent. And my opportunities were that nobody had ever heard of Big Cat Rescue back then. And so, in fact, back then our name was Wildlife on Easy Street. Nobody had heard of that place. And so I started going to all of the Chamber of Commerce meetings, and anything where if there was more than 2 people gathered, I was there telling them about Big Cat Rescue and about these cats and about the plight of them, and getting people to come out to the sanctuary and take a tour. And we survived. And I had to sell all of my household goods. I sold my favorite car. I had an amazing car that I had to sell, but I had to keep feeding the cats. And that work that I put into building up the community awareness of the fact that we were even here, because everybody called us Tampa's best kept secret. And it was like, okay, well, I can change that. And I think that was the toughest thing that I ever did, was to take that last $20,000, give it to somebody else and say, tell me what to do. I never would have thought that'd be something I'd do, but it worked.
Thank you. Thank you. Last question, which we've been asking all our guests for the benefit of mostly our first year students at Oxford, is for you to cast your mind back to when you were like 19, 20. What piece of advice would you give yourself back then?
If I could advise myself back then, I would advise myself to know that I am this eternal being, and I don't need the protection of a man in my life. When I left home at the age of 15, I left with a guy who was very much older than me, extremely abusive, beat the snot out of me all the time. I went from one bad relationship to another for most of my life because I felt like having that one male in my life was better than having being exposed to all of the evil that I thought existed in the world. And usually the person in my closest proximity was the one that was the most dangerous to me. So if I could tell my 19-year-old self, I'd say, go it alone, girl. You have got this.
Thank you so much, Carole Baskin. It's been an immense pleasure speaking to you this evening. And I can say on behalf of our members that we're very, very grateful that you have graced us with your presence today. And that's it for tonight. I'd like to welcome you all. I'd like to say good night to everyone and see you tomorrow if you want to come to see Brian Cranston at the Oxford Union at 8 p.m. Thank you once more, Carole Baskin.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.